so hard to resist your cravings, especially when you're trying to start a new healthy way of eating. Whether you're dieting to try and lose weight or you're just trying to cut down on snack foods and increase your vegetables, those cravings can really creep in. In this episode of the Inside Knowledge podcast, you'll learn what is a craving and why do we need those special foods that we crave. What's the link between diet and gut health, and also how to reduce the occurrence of these cravings, as well as what to do when a craving really hits you. You'll also hear some examples interspersed throughout today's episode of how I've worked with clients who asked for help with their cravings. Hello, welcome to episode 44 of the Inside Knowledge podcast. I'm Anna Mapson. Do you have a specific food that you really crave? Something that is always in the cupboard and always kind of calling to you in the evenings, maybe when you're watching TV, something that you just love. For some people it's things like ice cream, for others it's chocolate or crisps. These are common cravings foods. What's interesting about cravings is more often than not, it's a really specific type of food. So it's a particular brand or a particular flavour or product that you crave, and it's really intense drive to get that particular food that isn't quite the same as getting a different brand or a different flavour. It's something that's wrapped up in that particular food and its emotional attachment to you. I'm going to go through a few examples of why we have cravings and what they actually mean, a little bit about how we can deal with them, so what kind of things you can try to reduce down your cravings. A craving is just a really strong drive to have a particular food. If you think about the foods that we normally have a craving for, it's very rarely like broccoli or an apple. It's the type of foods that are highly processed, what we might call ultra-processed foods. They have that perfect, what's called the bliss point, with a mix of salts, sugars, that really try to encourage us to eat more, and often there's associated memories and an emotional attachment to the cravings. You know what, we're never born craving to eat salt and vinegar crisps or eating ice cream. Like, no one's born with that craving. We learn to crave foods or through nice experiences when a food has either comforted us, or other times it's because these foods, when we eat them, releases a little bit of dopamine and kind of can make you feel better. These chemicals in our brain that just help us feel soothed for a short moment. And that's where emotional eating can overlap with cravings. Sometimes there's a good memory that we've always had ice cream, for example, when we're on holiday with our family, and then we crave ice cream. And sometimes what we're craving is we're craving that connection or that sense of relaxation that we had when we were on holiday over and above the actual taste of the ice cream. Although sometimes taste and smell can be very evocative themselves as well and help us to feel better because they're helping us feel connected to a certain situation. Maybe when you eat certain foods that you used to eat at home or that you've had on holiday. But there are also physical reasons why you have more cravings at some points than others. One of the main reasons for having cravings for food, particularly in the evenings, is because you haven't eaten enough food during the day. Even people who are trying to lose weight and go on a diet need to eat regularly and need to eat a good level of food that sustains you. So that's complex carbohydrates, a good mix of fruits and vegetables, protein at every meal. These are things that keep your energy up, and when people are properly nourished throughout the day, cravings can go down. Now, I'm not saying that they definitely will, because it's much more complicated than just saying if you've eaten enough, you never get cravings, because clearly you do. So you might be low in energy, low in calories because you haven't eaten enough food. Secondly, you might be low in particular nutrients. So sometimes we have a craving for certain foods because actually it's something our body needs. Now, this theory, it feels like it should be right. So where people, for example, might be low in iron, they may be craving a steak. Where they are low in vitamin C, maybe they're craving some fresh fruit. It hasn't really been proven, I think, in looking at the scientific literature that people crave the nutrients that they need. However, if you're not eating enough food because your diet is very restricted, it could easily be the case that you are deficient in the nutrients and your body is giving you a sign to eat more. But I wouldn't say necessarily a particular nutrient is linked to a particular craving. Although we know, for example, in pregnancy, some women will find that they crave chalk, or they will be eating the lime scale out of their kettle, and people have thought that that is craving for calcium, for example, that's in the water, or some minerals. So sometimes it's called pica. This is potentially linked to nutrient deficiencies. The other thing is, if you are cutting out whole food groups, like you have gone low carb and you are eating no grains, no carbohydrates, then you may well be craving foods that are high in sugar and high in carbohydrates. So they're going to give you some energy. Another time when you might feel more cravings is alcohol. When people drink alcohol, generally you become a little bit more relaxed, and those moments you thought you would be able to control through willpower, or you thought you would stay away from eating the crisps or eating the chocolate, just becomes that much harder when you have had alcohol. For women who are menstruating, so before your period, you can sometimes also feel an increased need for the cravings. But often again, it comes back to having energy. So before our period, sometimes we'll be more tired because you sleep less well, because your body temperature raises slightly, which means that you feel more tired, you need an energy boost, and your brain is crying out for some glucose and some input of fresh energy. Now, I mentioned about willpower just then. If you are trying to just manage your cravings for certain foods by relying on willpower and thinking, well, I just won't eat them, then that is going to be extremely challenging. Self-control is not the best way to avoid eating foods you know that you have a strong craving for. There are lots of things you can do, and I'm going to talk through some of these in terms of setting up your environment to make things easy for you, thinking about your psychological state and putting some things in place to try and see the craving in a different way, and I will go through that as well. But I just also want to acknowledge the fact that in the UK, for example, where I'm recording this right now, we live in quite an obesogenic environment. So what I mean by that is there are encouragement to eat fast foods all around us. You go to the supermarket, there's sweets and crisps laid out as you're waiting to pay. On all the billboards, there is signs for fast foods. We're also getting bombarded with adverts on the TV, and when you're watching programs, there's encouragement and discounts to have fast food. So you're constantly being reminded that you should be eating more, and that's what the advertisers are telling you. So it's very hard to rely on willpower alone because of the environment which we live in. There was some great research a few years ago. I think they had about 100 students, maybe it was just under 100 students, and they asked them to carry around some chocolate in a clear packaging for 48 hours. So they had to have this chocolate on them, on display, in a clear plastic box. But they couldn't eat them. And then they asked them to eat as much as they wanted to after this 48 hours. And the people who carried around the chocolate in a closed box were less likely to eat as much food. Those who had to look at the chocolate for 2 days as they carried it around ate twice as much chocolate as the ones who didn't. And that's just a tiny little study showing the impact of seeing this delicious food, which, let's face it, tastes really nice, and logically that it's not great for you to eat it. However, when you're constantly being reminded of it, it's much harder to turn it down and to say no. I think there's also some evidence that the more of these foods we eat, the more we come to accept these tastes as normal. So what I mean by this is, if you are eating ultra-processed foods more often than not, you will become accustomed to the high levels of sugar and salt and fat. And also, what's really interesting is these foods are typically very easy to eat, so very soft. And although with the exception of crisps, but they are very soft and the texture is very smooth and it doesn't create a lot of chewing. If you think about the difference between eating that and a raw carrot or a piece of chewy meat, you have to really work your teeth to eat those things. And chewing in itself is really good for us. And actually chewing reduces down the amount of food that you consume in a meal, and there have been studies to show this. So if you eat food that's very easy to eat, doesn't require a lot of chewing, you can easily eat a lot more of it. Just going back to the environment setup. So if you think about the experiment I mentioned where people are looking at these snack foods and they are eating twice as much as the people who didn't have to look at them all the time, this brings us on to some of the things that you can start to do about it. So what I mean by this is if you set up your kitchen so that the foods that you want to eat more of are on display and look appetizing, maybe you have a fruit bowl out because you want to eat more fruit. Maybe you make it very easy for yourself to access a small little pack of vegetables that you can just dip into some hummus and have as a snack. But in order to see your snack foods, you put them somewhere where it's more difficult to get to. So there's a lot here about making your own environment as easy as you can. If you're just relying on willpower to get through the craving all the time, it's going to make your life really difficult, because in our brains, if you think about your brain like a computer, we have a kind of working memory that is available to process information, help us make day-to-day decisions, and focus. Like, that's our active working memory. We don't have to remember to brush our teeth every day. We don't have to remember to, how to walk down the stairs. All of these things we just know. We're doing them on autopilot. Like when you drive a car, you've been driving for years, you don't think about it, you just do it. If we had to think about every tiny thing every time we did it, we wouldn't get anywhere. Our brain only has so much processing power. So we like to put things on autopilot. But when those autopilot habits are not serving us well, we need to change them. And in order to do that, you have to go through some discomfort. You have to be able to sit with the feeling of wanting it and not eating it. And you have to accept that some element of that discomfort is going to be necessary for you to get over these cravings. It's not going to be easy, otherwise you would have done it already. You also can't get over your cravings if you're not doing those first things I mentioned. You need to be eating 3 meals a day, eating a good balanced diet with sufficient content, enough calories, enough protein, fats and carbs to get you through. If you're not doing that, it's going to be almost impossible to get over your cravings because your body is giving you a sign. There's 2 approaches to managing cravings in the moment. One of them is to try to get away from the craving by suppressing it, by distracting yourself. And then there's another way to accept this craving and to try and work with it. So I'll go through first some of the things you can do to suppress and distract yourself. Generally, it's thought in psychology, I think, although I'm not a psychologist, but that suppression and distraction is not as effective as other ways of managing cravings. But some things that you can try to get over your cravings: do something that is incompatible with eating. So if you notice a craving coming up, then you do something where you just can't physically eat at the same time. Maybe you're going for a walk and go around the block and just get out of the house, change your scenery. Maybe you start painting your nails and doing a little home manicure, or playing on a computer game. These things have actually been shown to, by distracting you, to take you away from that craving for the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean that the craving won't come back, but it can sometimes be just enough to get you through that moment, and then the craving's gone and it passes and you're okay. This is a particular technique which is helpful if your craving is associated with certain times of the day, like you've got the kids to bed and now it's your time and you feel like you need that chocolate because it's the end of the day. Or you clear up the dinner, settle down to watch your TV programme with your partner, and that's when you have a little snack. Like, if you have an association to a routine, then changing it up a little bit, doing things differently, sitting in a different chair, doing things in a different order, like really just changing up your habit can be a helpful way to break that association. Then the other approach is more based on accepting the fact that you have a craving and trying to sit with it. Now, this is really difficult to get used to at first, but what you can do is just to try noticing how you might rate your craving from 1 to 10, where 10 is like I really need to eat this right now. You rate it out of 10. Think about where you feel this craving in your body. Is it in your stomach, in your chest, maybe in your heart area, or is it in your mouth? Is it in your brain? Like, where do you feel this craving, this urge to eat? And what happens to this craving when you're not trying to get rid of it? When you're just sitting with it, does it get stronger? Does it come and go, rise and fall? Or does it actually go away? Sometimes by not suppressing it, not distracting yourself, but actually really getting into it and saying, I am accepting I have this urge. I have the urge to eat a chocolate digestive, and you think about how strong that is, and I notice it in my mouth. I can feel the texture of the biscuit. I can tell that I want to have that chocolate on my tongue. I'm noticing it. You might even think looking at yourself having the craving. So obviously don't do this if you've had any problems with dissociation, but you imagine looking at yourself as a person who has the craving and see if you can just take yourself out of yourself to do that. Might be a helpful way to just distance yourself from the physical feeling. Something else I've done with people before is to create a cravings card. So when you're in a good place, feeling strong, feeling like, yes, I'm going to get on top of this need to eat chocolate every night, what I'm going to do is create a plan that I decide now what I will do instead. So, for example, you could write on a little piece of paper, when I have the urge or the craving to eat my chocolate, I will, and then you write down what it is you're going to do. Maybe you're going to phone a friend. Maybe you're going to go and have a bath and put a face mask on and do something relaxing. Maybe you're going to do 5 minutes of yoga, do some deep breathing, whatever it is to just get more in touch with your body. So whether you're going to distract yourself, whether you're going to lean into the craving, doesn't matter as long as you have a plan that you think will work. And you keep that cravings card somewhere you can find it. I'm just going to finish up with a few practical tips that I've been advising a couple of clients on. Portion up your cravings food so that you only have small portions of the food, because this was something I was going to come on to at the end, but sometimes the cravings that we have are not actually that bad. Like, is it a problem to eat a little bit of chocolate every day? If it's not a problem for you, why do you need to control it? And sometimes just allowing it can be easier than trying to stamp the craving out. Obviously, if you're eating like a whole box of ice cream every night, that isn't great for your health over time, especially if you're someone who, most of my clients are, and people who listen to this podcast have got gut health issues. But maybe you don't have to rule it out completely. Can you have a very small amount or a portion that feels normal to you, and just try and work yourself down from what you're eating at the moment and have a small amount every day? Allow it, but don't eat the whole bar or don't eat the whole tub of ice cream. When I challenge my clients sometimes on, why don't you just not buy it and just not have the food in the house, because that would make it a lot easier, it can feel completely overwhelming and scary. If this is the case for you, then it might be easier to wean yourself off it rather than going cold turkey, by which I mean just small portions of chocolate or only putting out one small packet of crisps rather than the whole big bag. And this means you can have the thing that you want, but you're not going to have the whole thing. It makes it easier if you don't have it all staring you in the face and you know you're allowed a little bit. The other thing is to move these foods out of sight. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's really difficult to avoid foods that you crave if you're looking at them all the time. Put them in a cupboard that's harder to reach. Maybe one where you have to get a chair to stand up and to get it out of a high cupboard. The reason this is good is it gives you a moment of pause to think, do I really want to do this, or am I doing it on repeat? So when we have automatic habits that we always have, I don't know, biscuits when you have a cup of tea and you just want to break the habit of having the biscuits, then move the biscuits away from the tea so that you don't see them, you don't associate them, and you have to make a special trip to a different part of the kitchen in order to get the biscuits. And that is going to help you break that association. Doesn't mean you can't ever have a biscuit with your tea, but if this is something that you're trying to work on, it might be helpful. To sum up this episode, I would say try to stick to a good balanced diet throughout the day. That will help you to avoid physical reasons for your cravings. Try to allow yourself some of the foods that you can eat that are delicious and that give you joy. Because if you're eating a very plain, boring, what some people would name a clean diet, which I really don't like those words, but people call it clean eating. If you're eating that sort of quite dull, soulless food, it does feel very boring. And yes, you do want to break out of it. So try to have space for foods that you love and that you eat just for the taste of it. There isn't going to be any harm to your overall health by eating foods that you have a craving for in small doses. Unless, of course, you're allergic to them or they've got poison in them. The other part of my summary, I suppose, is just really about thinking through your psychological triggers for cravings. What are the emotions associated with eating these foods, and what can you do in order to strengthen your mental health so that you feel better? Because often the cravings are linked to emotional reasons for eating, which, by the way, we all do. We all eat for emotional reasons. However, if you're finding it's out of control or you're eating a lot more than you want to and you don't have the ability to stop, that's where it's useful to think about your general mental state and how you might be able to strengthen that, build some more mental resilience, and it may impact on how you approach cravings. I hope that's helpful for some of you, and if you would be so kind, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a review or rate my podcast. It really does help me. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening this week. If you want to get in touch, my email address is info@goodnessme-nutrition.com. Get in touch for any inquiries about working with me too. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Inside Knowledge, Better Digestion for Everyone.